Welcome. Thank you for coming out today. I'm Cheryl Jones, the Outreach and Education Coordinator for the Peconic Estuary Program. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the Peconic Estuary Program, some of the pollutants that are affecting the Peconic Estuary, and then we talk about our homeowner rebate program that will talk about rain gardens and what you can do as homeowners to your yards to help mitigate some of those problems. So this is my colleague, Christy Fortner, and she will be giving part of the presentation as well. And today we're going to talk about, as I said, the Peconic Estuary Program, some of the major pollutants that are threatening our estuary, rain gardens, using native plants for your conservation landscaping, installing rain barrels on your property and how easy that is. We'll talk about those a bit. More of the guidelines of the rewards program and how you can participate in it, who is qualified, and then questions for the end. We live in an estuary. A Peconic Bay is an estuary. Does anybody know what an estuary is? If you're not familiar with that, it is the area where the salt water from the ocean meets the fresh water from the land. These ecosystems are shallow coastal ecosystems that are very susceptible to human use and what we do on land affecting them. The Peconic Estuary here, you can see, encompasses many of the smaller bays that you might be familiar with. We're over here in Riverhead, as you know. But the estuary, part of the estuary is also the Peconic River, which extends all the way into Brookhaven National Lab. So that includes the township of Brookhaven. It also includes Southampton, East Hampton, Riverhead Township, as well as Southold. So there's a lot of people living within the estuary. When we talk about the watershed, it's not just the surface area of the Peconic Bay, the open water that we're talking about. We're also talking about the water on the land that actually enters the bay. So as you can see, about approximately 250 square miles of surface area of the bay, but we have almost just as much of that in land water as well, part of the watershed, almost 200 square miles. So really we're doubling our surface area of where the bay is and also the water that is going into the bay and affecting it. The estuary is approximately 46 miles long by 18 miles wide, and there's about 450 miles of shoreline. So as you're familiar with the East End, there is a seasonal population that shifts. And so that can range anywhere from 100,000 people to 280,000 people during the height of the season. And that puts a lot of pressure on the estuary at different times of the year. As you can see from the map, it's color-coded, and there are a lot of different types of land use within the Peconic Estuary watershed. Some of the red areas are denoted by businesses and commercial use. Mostly on the North Fork, you'll see a bit of brown, which is agricultural use, as we're familiar with the land use in that area. And on the South Shore, the purple talks about residential. Of course, you have residential pressures from both forks, but as we all know, the South Fork is primarily has a large population shift of people coming out seasonally during the summertime. And of course, there's many globally and locally rare species. There have been about 140 identified in the Peconic Estuary that are unique and native to the area. When we talk about the estuary, we're going to talk about the habitats that are very important to the Peconic Estuary ecosystem. First, you have your tidal marsh. These are your salt marshes. These you see everywhere. They are very important for flood protection. They reduce pollution and excess nutrients. They protect against erosion control, and they have a very high recreational and educational value as well. So these are the first areas that are going to soak up water, act like a sponge when you have a storm surge come in. That'll reduce flooding to towns and your properties. When these disappear and you have hardened shorelines, as you see the bulkheading in the picture over on the right, you're going to have a lot more property loss and property damage from storms and storm surge. These areas are actually really important as well in reducing the pollution and the nutrients that are going into the bay. So as water is running off from the land, these are the first areas where water is going to get soaked in, and these plants will use up the excess nitrogen, and it'll also soak in some of the pollutants, and through the biochemical processes in their roots, some of these pollutants can be changed into less harmful ones and enter the bay as something different. So that's obviously very important for everything that lives in there. The other important habitat in the estuary are the eelgrass meadows. These are fully submerged at all times. You don't see these. They can be found in anywhere from 1 feet to 20 feet of water, depending on light availability. They are very, very important for providing habitats and shelter for animals they can forage in there, they can hide in there. It's very important for very small animals as well as larger fish and flounder, things that like to hide in there from other predators. Eelgrass meadows are also incredibly important because they also help in erosion control. As storm surges come in, the movement of the blades will actually temper some of that wave energy, and that can also prevent major coastal flooding. It's also really important for water clarity and water quality. Eelgrass is a plant, and so through the process of photosynthesis, it's going to be providing oxygen to the benthos, or to the bottom. And that's really very important to animals who live at the bottom. Actually, all animals, most animals, will use one of these two habitats at some point in their life, whether it be their juvenile stages or their adult stages. Many notable species, commercially important species as well, your bay scallop, hard clams, many finfish that people like to not only fish to sell, but also recreational, people who like to fish and eat them on their own. So these habitats are very, very important within this estuary. So within the Peconic Estuary, there have been identified 12 impaired water bodies. These are areas that have been deemed substandard as far as their water quality parameters. As you can see in the Riverhead area here, there are two in particular, Reeves Bay and Meeting House Creek, actually, over, I think that's part of Aquabog. But it's not just the impaired water body problem isn't just a problem on the western part of the estuary, also throughout all of it, up on the North Fork and the South Fork as well. So it's really it's a problem that's facing the entire estuary, not just one particular area. And as these have been identified by the Peconic Estuary Program as impaired water bodies, they have specific management plans associated with them to try and mitigate some of these pollution problems. So who are we? We're Peconic Estuary Program. We're a national estuary program. To give you a little history, the U.S. EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, passed the Clean Water Act in 1972. I believe it was the 1985 amendment to that that created the National Estuary Program. The Clean Water Act is mainly focused on maintaining the integrity of wetlands as well as cleaning up wastewater. So this was very important in identifying estuaries that were nationally significant. In 1993, the Peconic Estuary was declared, I think, the 20th out of 28 estuaries of national significance by the EPA. So what does that mean? That means that we need to have a management program in place so we can really control and try to figure out how people on land are affecting the estuary. So that required an alliance of stakeholders to make sure that that happened, make sure we were using really good science, make sure that we were considering local concerns on how to best manage this resource. So the Peconic Estuary Program is an alliance of people from all of those stakeholders, scientists, policymakers, businesses, and community members such as yourselves. So as part of creating the Peconic Estuary Program, we were charged with creating the CCMP, which is the Comprehensive Conservation Management Plan. It's pretty much about 340 issues were identified as problematic in the Peconic Estuary. But when you really just kind of broaden those topics, the things that we are interested in dealing with and trying to fix are nutrients and brown tides, habitat and living resources, critical land protection, pathogens, and public education and outreach. So we've been around for about 20 years, and in that time we have made some major progress and have had some really great achievements that we can credit to ourselves. Of course, the completion of the CCMP in general was a huge accomplishment. If you guys have been down to the Peconic River ramp, the rock ramp, at Grangebell Park. I don't know if you're familiar with any of it. With it there, there's a picture of it right there. That's something that was just constructed recently to help freshwater fish spawning go up the river. So this time of year in particular, alewife herring are using this rock ramp to get up the river in order to spawn. And that's really vitally important for the health of our estuary as well. We're supporting bay scallop restoration efforts through Cornell Cooperative Extension and other local organizations within the estuary. We helped develop the Critical Lands Protection Strategy and implemented the Community Preservation Fund to protect the land from development. So if you're familiar, if you have bought a home in this area, you'll know that you had to pay a small percentage, I think it was about 5%, that went to this Community Preservation Fund. And that is really important for us to acquire land from future development, not PEP in particular, but just other important legislative bodies to protect land from development. We also implemented the nitrogen and pathogen pollution reduction plans and upgraded sewage treatment plants. Peconic Bay has been designated as a vessel waste no discharge zone, and so there are pump out stations located throughout the estuary to empty the waste from your boat. We also helped enact the Suffolk County Fertilizer Reduction Law. Is anybody familiar with that? Just curious. That law says that you cannot fertilize your lawn between the months of November and April. It's been, they discovered that it's just not important, it's not necessary. Nothing is going to grow, the fertilizer isn't actually going to work. So everything is being washed away right into the bay, it's unnecessary. So there's actually a law prohibiting you from doing that. We're also involved in long-term monitoring of water quality and seagrass distribution. Just this spring, we finished aerial surveys to flying overhead to map out areas where we think eelgrass is. Developed and implemented the sub-watershed specific management plans, which is just a fancy way of saying those impaired water bodies that we were talking about before, getting these smaller, more localized management plans in place. We've been very important in that role as well. So one of our most exciting projects that we have right now is the Riverhead Sewage Treatment Plant. The effluent is going to be used to irrigate the Indian Island Golf Course. I don't know if you have heard that in the news, but that's something that we just worked to get passed. Then we also created the Peconic Estuary Protection Committee, so that's the intermunicipal agreement between the 5 townships that control parts of the watershed that I mentioned before. This intermunicipal agreement is going to make it easier for everybody to work together for the same purpose in protecting the estuary and passing the right kinds of policies to protect that, that wonderful resource. And of course, the Homeowner Reward Program, which is what we're finally going to get to. So again, just to summarize the Peconic Estuary Program, our programming is really focused on citizen science. We want to involve people in species monitoring, invasive species removal, and water quality testing. We do have a Citizens Advisory Committee that helps advise PEP on restoration projects, education, and influence government on environmental law and policies. If you are interested in joining our CAC, you can talk to me about that afterward. We have a meeting coming up in April. And understanding land use is very important, that we are educating the public on letting them know that what they do on land absolutely affects the water.
All right, so one of the major contributor to poor water quality of our bays is from stormwater runoff and stormwater pollution. So stormwater runoff is just basically when it rains or when the snow starts to melt, that all is going to run into the street from our lawns, from farms or construction sites, and that all goes into the grates that you see on the side of the street, and then that funnels into different waterways. So within the Peconic watershed, anybody that lives within there, whatever runs off of your yard is going right into the Peconic estuary. And when all of that runs off, it's going to pick up different pollutants along the way. And as Cheryl said, that nothing's being treated, it just goes right in. There's no kind of system that's going to clear out any of these pollutants. So what kind of pollutants are in the stormwater runoff? The major pollutants are going to be our heavy metals and oil and grease, soil and sediment, floatable debris, phosphorus and nitrogen, road salt, biodegradable materials, and bacteria. So in general, that's what the most pollutants that are going into the stormwater runoff. But out on the east end, we have 2 major ones that are a problem more than the others. And those 2, which we're going to talk more about right now, are the nitrogen and the bacteria. So nitrogen is a naturally occurring element, and it's vital for all growth of plants and animals, and it's also the most abundant element in our atmosphere. It's 77% of our atmosphere is nitrogen. And it's a good thing because otherwise nothing else can grow. However, if you're going to have it in excess, like from fertilizers running off, it's going to cause eutrophication, which is an enrichment of the ecosystem, and that causes rapid growth and an accelerated rate that otherwise wouldn't happen naturally. So, for example, your marsh grasses. If those get excess nutrients and they start to grow faster, you might think, well, that's great. We're getting bigger marsh lands, and that's going to be a good thing. It's more habitat. But what happens is that it grows so fast that the blades grow up tall, but it doesn't give it enough time for the roots to hold. So any kind of strong wind comes, and it's going to break. And now you've actually lost habitat as opposed to gaining. And whenever you consider the phytoplankton, those are just little tiny organisms that you really can't see, but if you have excess nutrients, depending on what types are in the water, they're going to cause blooms, and that's where you get your brown tides. On your left, you have the brown tide. In the middle, it's a picture of a rust tide, and then over on the right, it's a red tide. And those are all dependent on what kind of phytoplankton are in the water at the time of the excess nutrients. If you have a dinoflagellate that's called anophagephorans, that's going to be your brown tide. If there's a lot of that in there, it's going to take over, and now you have your brown tide in the water. If you have something else, like Alexandrium, for example, that's particularly nasty. That causes your red tides, and those are most harmful to us. Your brown tides and your rust tides, those are bad for the fish. They're bad for the shellfish. They make it cloudy for submerged aquatic vegetation, which is just fancy for like your eelgrass, anything that's photosynthetic underwater. And then anything that can't swim away is just subject to all of that right there. The finfish can swim out of these tides, but your crabs can only crawl so fast, and the clams, I mean, they really can't move. They can't get out of this. So, right, so now you've got this big bloom, and eventually those nutrients are going to run out. And once that happens, all of your phytoplankton, whichever kind of bloom that you had, is going to die. And when it dies, it sinks down through the water column. And then the bacteria come into play, and they try and break everything down because they love everything that is decomposing. So they break it down, but when that happens at such a high volume, it's going to pull the oxygen out of the water. And so again, your finfish, they can swim out of this oxygen-depleted zone, but anything on the bottom can't, and that nothing can live in the water without the oxygen. So it's very harmful to a lot of different things. And as you know, out on the East End, we are big into shellfishing. That's how a lot of people make their living. And when you have these big blooms, that's going to affect our economy and our livelihood. So the other major contributor to poor water quality out here, as I said, was bacteria. So what kind of bacteria? Well, whenever we're testing the waters, we are looking for E. coli or Enterococcus. It's a bacteria. It's actually not that harmful to us exactly. We all have it in our digestive tracts, but we use it as an indicator, right? So this indicator species, what does that actually mean? It means that if these bacteria are in high numbers in the water, there's a very good chance that you're going to have harmful bacteria, pathogens, and parasites that are going to actually harm you if you're going to consume the water, when you're swimming in it, or if you consume something that lives in the water like the shellfish. So the two most common ones that are associated with that is Giardia, which is a parasite, and that causes all kinds of gastrointestinal illnesses, and Critosporidium, which is a pathogen. And those are nasty. That's going to make anybody sick, or if it gets into the shellfish and you eat that, that's going to make you sick as well. So where are the main sources of this bacteria that are coming into the water from the stormwater runoff? Your main sources are going to be wildlife, which is the deer and the raccoons and the foxes and birds. The geese come in and like to hang out on the shore. Everybody has seen that at some point, I'm sure. And their droppings are on the beach, and that's going to all run off into the water at a very heavy storm. Another way is through humans. So we have septic systems that sometimes they're leaky or they're faulty, and when that happens, it's going to rush in faster than it normally would, and you can get these high bacteria counts that way as well. So it's important to check your systems to make sure that they're working properly. But also people that are out on the boats. A lot of us have boats. We love spending time out on the water in the summer. Some people directly discharge their waste from being out on the boat all day directly into the water. Now, Peconic Estuary, the entire estuary is a no discharge zone, so that's not allowed, and there are pump out stations around the shores. So those are really important to use because you're polluting the environment by just dumping your waste out. And lastly, a major source is from your pets. So if you take the estimated number of pets in Suffolk County, and the average number of households and the average number of pets within the household and the average weight, and you figure all that out, you can calculate an estimated number of 37,577 tons of animal waste being produced every year just in Suffolk County. So not all of that waste is going to end up in the water, right? A lot of us actually have pets that are going to be in the backyard. That's where they do their business and strictly that. So great. But If you're going to take the percentage of people that have dogs that take them to the parks or down to the beach and walk them and never clean up the waste, which is a smaller percent, it's something like 30% of everybody that owns a dog. That's not that much, you would think. So that's great, but when you take the averages of all of that and do the calculations, you're still at 6,500 tons a year of animal waste that could make it into the water. Okay, it's a lot of numbers, right? 6,500 is a lot less than 37,000, right? So let's imagine that just 1% of that waste makes it into the water system. That's 6,500 tons, just 1% of it makes it in there. That's 65 tons. Tiny fraction of this 37,000, right? You'd think it's not that big of a deal. But what weighs 65 tons? 13 school buses. That's not 13 school buses filled with animal waste, that's in weight, all right? So it is actually very important, even though it seems like it's just one pet, one time, it really does make a difference. So it's important for everybody to clean up after their pets. And these are all ways that we can help reduce the waste that's getting into our estuaries. So to reel it all back in, the consequences for nitrogen and the bacteria getting into our waterways and polluting it, you're going to have your shellfish being reduced and potentially becoming toxic to us when we consume it, and then just to themselves it can deplete their populations. Your beach and your shellfish bed closures, both from the nitrogen and the bacteria. There are countless summers where there are some beaches that are closed down during a rainfall event just as a precaution. We know this is an area that has a lot of pollution whenever it rains, and we're closing it down ahead of time. And then also your habitat loss, your decreased water quality, and reduced ecosystem biodiversity, which is just the amount and the number of different types of organisms living in the area. And a happy ecosystem is one with a lot of different types of organisms, a lot of different types of fish and shellfish and plants and algae. So what we're going to offer you today is a rewards program that's going to help reduce the amount of pollutants getting into our waterway. And you've got three options here. You can do a rain garden, which is the picture on the bottom, a rain barrel, which is the top right photo, and just also native plants. If you don't want to go so into having the full rain garden, which can be a little bit intricate, if you just want to plant some native plants, that also helps as well. So what is a rain garden? Think about a garden that you have in your home already, in your yard. Hopefully nobody has a garden in their home. So in your yard, just different plants and flowers, all of that. It's basically that, but it's a bowl shape. So it causes a depression in the earth so that when it rains, it can hold on to all the water instead of just running right off. So the function of it is very simple. It rains, and the storm water is collected into the garden because it's sunken down a little bit. The plants are going to absorb the water and the nutrients and trap any of the sediment that otherwise would be running off into the streets and then out into our bays. And then the water is going to filter through the soil, entering the groundwater, which we all know all our drinking water comes from our groundwater. So that's just very simply, that's exactly how it works. You really don't need to do anything to it. The water is naturally going to soak into the earth by itself. So there's a number of benefits to having a rain garden. Like I said, it naturally reduces the amount of pollution that's going to enter the waterways because it traps that water that would be running off otherwise. It's going to provide important habitat for native birds and butterflies if you choose the right plants for your garden. It also helps reducing flooding because, again, that water that would otherwise rush off really fast is going to get trapped in your yard, so it'll reduce the amount that's actually going into the waterway. And it recharges the groundwater because now it's all soaking down in instead of just running right out into the estuary. So you've decided to do a rain garden. You want to build one. You got to first think about your location, okay? You got to think where your underground wires and your gas lines and your septic and sewer systems, because the last thing you want to do is start digging up and then hit one of these lines. You're going to have a huge issue with that. So you got to make sure you know where all that is ahead of time. So then you want to think about where your water moves, okay? So where are your downspouts in your gutters? When it rains, the roof funnels everything into your gutters and then out into the streets. Maybe you want to think about putting one of these gardens closer to that so you can funnel that water that comes off the roof that goes directly into the rain garden now. That might be a good spot. Or maybe some of you have areas of your yard that already pond water. It rains really heavily and you've got yourself a little natural pond that ends up in your backyard. That might be a good place, but The whole reason that a rain garden works is because it allows the water to drain into the ground, okay? So if you have an area that's ponding water, not only is it not running off into the street already, which is great, but the soil there might not be ideal for your rain garden. You gotta think about your soil as well. So if that water is ponding and staying there for longer than 24 to 48 hours, the spot's no good. You shouldn't use it because your rain garden won't work. That water's not gonna soak into the ground, which is the sole function of how it works, okay? So then you got to think about an appropriate distance from your house, which we recommend 10 to 30 feet. You can move it closer to the 10-foot mark if you don't have a basement, but you don't want any kind of flooding to happen. So that's why we suggest a little bit farther away. And this is great for the front yard, the backyard. If you guys have side yards, that's fine. But it's best if it's going to be in a sunny location, so not under a tree, not only because you're going to reduce the amount of options that you have when you're choosing your plants, but if you try and put it under a tree, which looks pretty, you're going to disrupt all the root system when you start digging, so just be mindful of that. All right, so you've picked the place that you want your rain garden to go. You got to consider the appropriate size and shape of your rain garden. There are a lot of different options. You can just have it a square, you can have it kind of in an infinity, pretty, you know, kind of shape to it. And then you got to think about the size of it. So we recommend 100 to 300 square feet, but that's really going to depend on the volume of water that's coming into it. If you have a high volume area, you're going to want to make it a little bit bigger. But here on Long Island, with the amount of rain that we get, 1 to 300 square feet is going to be fine. And then again, like I said, you want to think about the soil composition, right? So think about what you have. Do you have a sandy, more of a sandy soil composition? You can just dig a hole and see it and feel it. And if it's more sandy, that means that the water is going to soak through quicker, okay? So then your silts are kind of in between. They're smaller than the sandy particles, but they're bigger than the clay particles. So it'll still you know, absorb the water faster, but not as fast as if it was a sandy-based soil. And then finally, if you have a clay soil composition, those are really fine particles, and you're going to have a hard time getting the water to drain into the ground because it's going to take so long. So if you have that kind of soil composition, you might want to think about making it bigger, or maybe adding some kind of topsoil to it just to mix it up and make it more appropriate for your rain garden. So the rain garden depth is typically between 4 to 8 inches when you're digging down, but the most important part is that it remains flat, all right? Some of us, not everyone has a perfectly flat lawn. So whenever you're digging, if you're on a little bit of a slope, you're gonna wanna make sure to dig down a little farther on that one side, as opposed to just digging down 4 feet and having your rain garden on a slope. It's really important to keep the bottom of it level. And then if you are on a slope, right, and now the bottom of your rain garden where you've dug is level, but you still have a little bit of a slope that you're building on, you're going to want to take the dirt that you dig up and put a little berm around the edge so that when you have that slope, you're just going to pile up a little bit of the soil so that when the water runs, it's going to catch into the rain garden and not flow right through it, because then it's not doing its purpose anyways. So just really be mindful of your yard and of the slopes and of the soil composition. And then finally, whenever you're thinking about what plants, the fun part to put everything in your rain garden, you want to use native plants whenever possible. Well, why? What's the benefit of using native plants? Native plants are found in a particular geographic region that have been growing there for thousands of years. They're going to be adapted to the climate, the soil, rainfall, and availability of pollinators like your bees and your butterflies. So they're going to require less attention. If it's a drought season where we don't have a lot of rain, well, if you have a plant that needs a lot of rain that wasn't naturally from here, you're gonna have to go out there and water it more. It's gonna require more of your time, more of your energy, and potentially more of your money. So whenever you do consider the plants that you're choosing, the native ones that is, you're gonna wanna think about what does that plant need? What does that native plant require? How much sunlight does it need? How much rain does it need? And then also, we have a whole list online of all of these because it can get a little confusing as to which plants you want to choose. So I'll show you in a little bit when we get onto the website. I have a few slides, but that's where you're going to be able to find the list for all of the native plants that we suggest. But of course, if you know of others, you're more than welcome to plant those as well. And then our last option is to plant rain barrels, or not plant rain barrels, to install rain barrels. So a rain barrel is going to collect the water that runs from your rooftop and collect it. So if you see it in the picture on the top right there, all the water runs out, goes directly into your rain barrel, and you can use that at a different time whenever it's not raining. So you can use that to plant the plants that you've just done in your rain garden whenever there's been a few weeks without rain. You could use it to top off your swimming pool. It's fresh water, so you can use it to wash your car, whatever you'd like. And if you pay for consumption of water, it can reduce the amount that you're paying for, because now you're using water that came directly from the rain and you have it stored away and can use that, as opposed to using something that would otherwise cost you money. And people can get very basic, you can be very basic with this and just buy your rain barrel, install it, and you're done. And other people get a little bit more creative with it and they want to have some fun. And the picture on the bottom right there shows how there were plants on top of it, and then any extra water goes through into the rain garden, into the rain barrel. So you can do a lot of different stuff with this. So if you just do a quick Google search or Yahoo search, whatever you use, you can see a lot of different options. And these can be available. You just have to check around either at depot stores or local nurseries. You can just call around, but they are available. So we'll get into the guidelines now of this. So if you're doing your conservation landscaping, which is taking out the grass and planting native plants, that kind of thing, or if you have turf or asphalt and you want to rip that out and put native plants in, that's what that means, okay? Not planting more, I don't know, non-native grass. The grass that you have in your yard now that's not going to retain the water as well as a rain garden, or the plant system that's going to have the roots that take up the water. That's what we're talking about here. So for your conservation landscaping, or for doing your rain garden installation, that's digging it up, the plants that you choose, all of that, it's got to be at least 50 square feet. And the maximum reward that you can get is $500. So you can really do the calculations on your own and say, how big is this going to be? How much money is it going to cost me? And then adjust it if you want a little bit of a smaller rain garden, so that you're not spending over $500. You can do this so that it's at no cost to you once you get reimbursed. But people can make them bigger. You can do more rain gardens. You can have more than one. But the maximum that you can get is $500 for this project. And then also for the rain barrels, it has to be at least a 50-gallon rain barrel. And the maximum that you can get returned to you is $100. And there are rain barrels for under $100. It's not like we're asking you to spend $150 for a rain barrel and there's nothing cheaper, so you're out of pocket $150, or I'm sorry, $50. You can get these for under $100, and you can still get $100 back on this. And you can do combinations. You can get a rain barrel and also do a rain garden, and just as long as you have the receipts, so that you can document this, and receipts for your plants, then you should be fine. Are you within the watershed? It's a great question, right? Because you can only have this, we're only offering this rebate to people if you're within the watershed, if your lawn runoff goes into the Peconic Estuary. So this is a general outline of our watershed, and it gets a little tricky in there. On the North Fork, that line is in between 25 and Sound Avenue, and then the further east you go, it kind of goes up a little bit and it almost becomes Sound Avenue. And then on the South Shore, that line is about a few miles north of 27. So if you're near one of those borders and you're not 100% sure if you actually qualify, if you live within the watershed, you can contact us and say, listen, this is where I live on this street, do I qualify? And we'll just check it at a closer level, and we can figure that out for you. Or you can go to our interactive map on our website and you can zoom in, and that's also another way that you can find out. All right, so what happens now? You're interested, you want to do the application. We have handouts here that you can take with you, or you can go online. So step one is to fill out your application, and you have to send it to us. If you want to take one from back here, great. If you want to get it offline, you just go to peconicestuary.org. And on the bottom right, we're going to have our featured project, so you click on that, and that's the whole rewards program. And then on the bottom left here, it says PEP, Homeowner Rewards Program Application. And that's also where you can find a whole bunch of other documents, the why use native plants, the rain garden construction. We have a whole bunch of information up there that you can look at. So that's available to you. And on the right side there, that's the Peconic Estuary Watershed. That's going to be your interactive map. You can click on that, and it's a Google Earth map, I think, so that you can zoom in closer to see if you're at that boundary, if you make the qualifications for the rebate program. So once you send in your application to us, we're gonna look it over, say, okay, what you wanna do is either acceptable or it's not acceptable and you have to change a few things. And once we say it's okay, we like your ideas, this is an appropriate size, this is a good rain garden, or these are appropriate plants, these are native plants, so we will reimburse you for them. We give you the okay, you do your project. After you have the project done, you take pictures and you contact us, and then we'll make sure that everything was followed through correctly. We'll look at your receipts, and then you'll be reimbursed. That's our presentation for the Homeowners Rewards Program. We just wanted to let you know, if you are interested in the Citizens Advisory Committee, our next meeting is Saturday, April 18th from 10 to 12. It's going to be out in Southold. We try and mix up the locations because unfortunately our estuary is forked, so driving around can be a little bit much for people. So our last one was on the South Shore, and this one is going to be on the North Shore. So after that, we are going to have a beach cleanup at noon at the location, because the location we're having is right on the beach. So there's a facility there we can have our meeting and then go out onto the beach and do the cleanup. So if you want to join us for either or both, that's great. Just let us know. It's also on our website. We have handouts for the CAC meeting, so anything that you have questions with, feel free to ask us.
So we'll also be doing a tour of the Schmelk facility, which is the Cornell Cooperative Extension facility up there. Schmelk stands for Suffolk County Marine Environmental Learning Center. And we'll be doing a tour of that so you can see all the different projects that are going on there. We'll also be giving a tour of PEP's atmospheric monitoring equipment. We have some equipment out there that we use to collect scientific data on what's going on in the estuary and climate change, things of that nature. And we'll also be talking more about the stormwater issue and what we can do as citizens to be involved in the topic and the discussion about that. So I hope you can join us. Thanks.